The following account has been compiled from multiple sources. The personal journal of Edward Crane, lighthouse keeper assigned to Morrow Head Light Station on the coast of Washington State from March 2019 until his disappearance on November 14, 2023. Audio recordings made by his replacement, Samuel Torres, upon discovery of the journal and subsequent events. Incident reports filed by the United States Coast Guard Sector, Puget Sound. Interview transcripts with local residents, former keepers, and emergency responders, and meteorological data from the National Weather Service documenting the storm system that struck the Pacific Northwest coast on the night in question. Edward Crane's body has never been recovered. The lighthouse at Morrow Head remains operational under automated systems. No human keeper has been assigned to the station since December 2023. Samuel Torres arrived at Morrow Head on the afternoon of November 15, 2023, expecting to begin a routine 3-month rotation as the station's caretaker. The position was part of a historical preservation program administered by the Washington State Parks Department, one of the last lighthouse stations in the continental United States to maintain a human presence despite full automation of the navigational systems. Torres, a retired Coast Guard petty officer with 23 years of service, had applied for the position specifically because of its isolation, describing in his application letter a desire for time away from the noise of modern life and an opportunity to reconnect with the maritime traditions that defined my career. He had been told that the previous keeper, Edward Crane, would brief him on the station's operations and then depart on the same boat that brought Torres to the island. What he found instead would haunt him for the rest of his life. The first indication that something was wrong came when the supply boat approached the pier and no one emerged from the keeper's quarters to meet them. This was unusual. Lighthouse keepers, by nature of their isolation, typically greeted arriving vessels with enthusiasm, eager for news from the mainland and the simple pleasure of human contact. The boat's captain, a weathered fisherman named Douglas Harding, who had been running supplies to Morrow Head for 15 years, noted that the station looked wrong, though he couldn't articulate exactly what he meant. The lighthouse beam was still rotating. The fog signal equipment appeared. Operational, but there was a stillness to the place that felt unnatural, a sense that the buildings were holding their breath. Torres disembarked with his duffel bag and walked up the path toward the keeper's quarters, while Harding began unloading supplies. He knocked on the door. No answer. He tried the handle and found it unlocked. He stepped inside and called out Edward Crane's name. Silence. The quarters were empty but not abandoned. A coffee cup sat on the kitchen table, half full, cold. A book lay open on the arm of the living room chair, spine cracked to hold the page. A jacket hung on the hook by the door, still damp. Everything suggested that Edward Crane had been there recently, that he had simply stepped out for a moment and would return. But he did not return. And when Torres began searching the quarters more thoroughly, when he opened the desk in the small office where keepers maintained their records and correspondence, he found the journal that would explain everything, and nothing at the same time. The journal was a standard composition notebook, black and white marbled cover, the kind sold in every office supply store in America. The first entry was dated March 7, 2019, the day Edward Crane arrived at Morrow Head to begin his assignment. His handwriting was neat, precise, the script of a man who had been trained in documentation and took pride in clarity. The entry described his arrival, his first impressions of the station, his meeting with the outgoing keeper, whose name Torres would later discover was Robert Ashworth. Crane wrote that Ashworth seemed eager to leave, almost anxious, and that he had provided the standard briefing on operations and maintenance with what felt like excessive haste. But before departing, Ashworth had pulled Crane aside and told him something that was not in any official manual, not part of any training protocol, something that Crane wrote down verbatim because it seemed so strange. 3 rules. First, never let the light go dark, not for any reason, not even for maintenance during daylight hours. The backup systems will keep it running, but check them every day, twice a day. Make it your religion. Second, if you hear knocking during a storm, do not open the door. I don't care what you hear. I don't care if it sounds like a person in distress. I don't care if it sounds like the Coast Guard themselves calling your name. You do not open that door until the storm has passed and daylight has come. Third, if, you see someone on the rocks below the lighthouse, someone who shouldn't be there, someone who seems to be looking up at your window. Do not wave, do not call out, do not acknowledge their presence in any way. Pretend you don't see them, pretend they don't exist, and they'll go away. Eventually, they always go away if you don't acknowledge them. Crane's journal entry from that day notes that he asked Ashworth to explain these rules, to provide some context for warnings that seemed to border on superstition. Ashworth's response, according to Crane, was to look at him with eyes that had seen too much and say, "I've been here 4 years. I've followed the rules. That's why I'm leaving on my own 2 feet instead of leaving the way the others left. Just follow the rules, Crane. Don't ask why, don't test them. Just follow them and you'll be fine." Then he boarded the supply boat and never looked back, and Edward Crane was alone at Morrow Head Light Station with 3 rules he didn't understand and 4 years of silence ahead of him. The early entries in Crane's journal are unremarkable, documenting the routine of lighthouse keeping with methodical attention to detail. He writes about the weather, the condition of the equipment, the wildlife he observes from the gallery windows. He writes about the books he reads, the radio programs he listens to, the letters he sends to his daughter in Spokane. He writes about the loneliness, which he describes as a weight that settles on the chest, not heavy enough to crush but always present, always reminding you that you are the only human heartbeat for miles in any direction. He does not write about the rules except in passing references, noting that he has checked the backup systems as instructed, that he has secured the doors when storms approach, that he has refrained from approaching the windows on the western side of the building after dark. He treats the rules the way a person might treat any workplace protocol, following them without necessarily believing they are necessary, trusting that someone at some point had a reason for implementing them, even if that reason is no longer apparent. The first anomalous entry appears on October 23, 2019, approximately 7 months after Crane's arrival. It is brief, only a few lines written in handwriting that is slightly less steady than his usual script. He writes, "Storm came through last night. High winds, heavy rain, visibility near 0. Light held steady. Thank God. Heard knocking around 2 a.m. Loud, insistent, like someone pounding with both fists. Remembered Ashworth's warning. Did not open the door. Knocking continued for approximately 40 minutes, then stopped. This morning found scratches on the outside of the door. Deep gouges in the wood. No explanation, no tracks in the mud. Will report to maintenance as weather damage. Do not want to think about alternatives." Samuel Torres, reading this entry in the empty keeper's quarters on November 15th, 2023, felt the first chill of recognition. He walked to the front door and examined it, and what he saw made him step back involuntarily. The door was covered in scratches, dozens of them, layered over each other in patterns that suggested years of accumulation. Some were shallow, barely visible. Others were deep enough to expose the raw wood beneath the paint. They covered the entire surface of the door from top to bottom, concentrated most heavily around the handle and the frame where the door met the jamb. Torres had seen storm damage before, had seen what wind-driven debris could do to a structure. This was not storm damage. This was something else. He returned to the journal and continued reading. The entries from late 2019 through 2020 document a pattern that would become familiar. Storms would come, knocking would occur, Crane would not open the door, and in the morning there would be new scratches. Crane's tone in these entries shifts gradually from clinical observation to something closer to resignation. He stops reporting the scratches as weather damage. He stops trying to explain them at all. He simply notes their occurrence and moves on, the way a person might note any recurring phenomenon that defies understanding. He writes about trying to record the knocking, setting up an audio recorder near the door during storms, but the recordings always come back corrupted, filled with static and interference that he attributes to electrical disturbance from the weather. He writes about listening more carefully during the knocking, trying to discern patterns or characteristics that might identify the source. He writes that sometimes the knocking sounds like fists on wood, sometimes like open palms, sometimes like something harder, like bone or stone. He writes that sometimes, in the pauses between knocks, he hears something else, something that might be breathing or might be the wind or might be a voice too low to understand. On March 3, 2020, the first anniversary of his arrival at Morrow Head, Crane writes an entry that spans 4 pages and represents the most detailed account of a single night in the entire journal. A major storm had struck the coast, one of the worst in decades, with sustained winds over 80 miles per hour and waves reaching 40 feet. Crane had secured the station as best he could, checked the backup systems 3 times, and settled into the keeper's quarters to wait out the night. The knocking began at 11:47 p.m. It was different this time, he writes. More insistent, more varied. It moved around the building, starting at the front door, then shifting to the windows, then to the back door, then to the walls themselves, as if whatever was making the sound was circling the structure, testing every point of entry. Crane sat in the center of the living room with his back to the wall, watching the doors and windows, listening to the knocking move from point to point with a methodical patience that suggested intelligence, suggested purpose, suggested that whatever was out there knew exactly what it was doing and was willing to wait as long as necessary. Then, at 1:23 a.m., something changed. The knocking at the front door stopped, and in the silence that followed, Crane heard a voice. It was faint, barely audible over the howl of the wind, but it was unmistakably human, unmistakably speaking words rather than mere sounds. It was calling his name. "Edward," the voice said. "Edward, please, I need help. I've been shipwrecked. I'm hurt. Please open the door." Crane did not move. He did not respond. He sat in the center of the room and listened to the voice plead with him, beg him, describe injuries and cold and the certainty of death if he did not help. The voice knew things about him. It knew his daughter's name. It knew the name of the ship he had served on during his time in the merchant marine. It knew details about his life that no stranger washed up on the rocks could possibly know, and still Crane did not move. He sat and listened and remembered Ashworth's warning, remembered the rule that had seemed like superstition 7 months ago, but now felt like the only thing standing between him and something he could not comprehend. The voice continued for hours, shifting tactics, shifting tone, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, sometimes weeping with a despair so profound that Crane felt his own eyes fill with tears, even as he refused to stand, refused to approach the door, refused to do anything that might be interpreted as acknowledgement. Finally, as the first grey light of dawn began to penetrate the storm clouds, the voice fell silent. The knocking did not resume. Crane waited another 3 hours before he opened the door. What he found on the doorstep made him close the door immediately and not open it again for 4 days. He does not describe what he found. The entry simply states, "Something was left at the door. I will not describe it. I have disposed of it. In the ocean. I will not write about it. I will not think about it. Some things are not meant to be recorded." The journal entries from 2020 through early 2023 are sparser, more perfunctory, the observations of a man who has learned to stop questioning and simply endure. Crane documents the storms, the knocking, the voices that sometimes accompany the knocking. He documents the scratches that appear on the doors and windows, the objects that are occasionally left on the doorstep, the figures he sometimes sees on the rocks below when the storms clear, and the first light of dawn reveals the coastline. He follows the rules. He does not open the door during storms. He does not acknowledge the figures on the rocks. He keeps the light burning with religious devotion, checking the system so frequently that it becomes a compulsion, a ritual that structures his days and gives them meaning when meaning seems impossible to find. He survives. But survival, he writes in one of his rare reflective entries, is not the same as living. Survival is merely the absence of death. Living requires something more, something that he feels slipping away from him with each passing month, each passing year, each night spent listening to the knocking and the voices and refusing to respond. On September 14, 2023, 2 months before his disappearance, Edward Crane wrote an entry that Samuel Torres would read over and over again in the days following his discovery, trying to understand what it meant and what it portended. Crane wrote, "I've been here 4.5 years now, longer than anyone since the lighthouse was automated. I've followed the rules. I've kept the light burning. I've survived every storm, every knock, every voice that called my name from the darkness. I thought I understood. I thought the rules were enough, but I've started to notice something that I didn't notice before. The scratches on the door. They're not random. They never were. They form patterns, words, messages. Spent 3 days studying them, tracing them with my fingers, trying to read them like Braille, and I think I've finally understood what they say. The same message, over and over, accumulated over years of storms and knocking and waiting. The message is simple. The message is, we know you're in there, we can wait, we have always been waiting. Someday you will open the door. Someday everyone opens the door. We can wait forever. Can you? The final entry in Edward Crane's journal is dated November 14th, 2023, the night before Samuel Torres arrived to find the station empty. It was written during a storm, the same storm that Torres had heard about on the mainland, a powerful system that had caused flooding and power outages throughout the region. The entry is short, only half a page, and the handwriting deteriorates as it progresses, starting with Crane's usual precise script and ending in something barely legible, scrawled at an angle as if written by a hand that was shaking too badly to maintain proper form. Torres read this entry standing in the empty keeper's quarters, with the wind howling outside and the lighthouse beams sweeping past the windows every 30 seconds, and what he read made him understand why Edward Crane was gone and why he would never be found. The storm is the worst I've seen in 4 years. The knocking started an hour ago, but tonight is different. Tonight they're not knocking on the door. They're knocking from inside the walls. I can hear them. In the structure itself, in the space between the inner and outer walls. Moving around, circling, getting closer. The voices are clearer now. They're not outside anymore. They're here, inside the station, inside the walls, and they're telling me that they've been patient long enough, that they've been waiting since before the lighthouse was built, that they were here when the first ships foundered on these rocks, and they will be here when the last human forgets that this place ever existed. They're telling me that the light doesn't keep them out. It never did. The light is a beacon. It calls to them. It shows them where we are. All these years, we thought the light protected us. We were wrong. The light marks us. The light says, here is someone alone. Here is someone isolated. Here is someone who cannot run, cannot hide, cannot call for help. Here is someone who will eventually break. The knocking has stopped. Now there is only silence. Silence and the sound of breathing. The breathing is coming from the bedroom. I did not open the door. I followed the rules. But I understand now that the rules were never meant to protect us. The rules were meant to keep us here. The rules were meant to keep us waiting until they were ready. They are ready now. Someone is standing in the hallway. I can see their shadow under the door. The shadow is wrong. The proportions are wrong. I think I will answer when they knock. I think I am tired of not answering. I think that whoever finds this journal will understand. Sometimes the only way out is through. Sometimes you have to open the door. I am going to open the door now. Goodbye. I hope the light is kind to whoever comes after me. Samuel Torres read the final entry 3 times, his hands trembling, the pages rattling in his grip. He looked at the hallway door that led to the bedroom. It was closed. He had not opened it since entering the quarters, had not even thought to check the other rooms. So focused had he been on the empty kitchen, the cold coffee, the abandoned book. Now he walked toward that door with the slow, reluctant steps of a man approaching something he did not want to see but could not avoid. He put his hand on the handle. He pushed the door open. The bedroom was empty. The bed was made with military precision. The personal effects on the dresser were arranged with careful attention to order. The window that faced west, toward the open Pacific, was closed but unlocked, and on the floor, in front of the window, there was something that should not have been there, a pool of water, still wet, still spreading, forming a shape that might have been a footprint, or might have been 2 footprints, or might have been something else entirely, something that did not correspond to any human anatomy Torres recognized. He backed out of the room and closed the door. He went to the kitchen and found the radio. He called the supply boat, which had anchored in the cove to wait out the residual weather from the previous night's storm. He told Captain Harding that the previous keeper was gone, that the station was empty, that something was very wrong at Morrow Head. He told Harding to contact the Coast Guard. He told Harding to send help. Then he sat in the chair, where Edward Crane had apparently sat 4 years ago and every day since, and he waited. The Coast Guard arrived 4 hours later, a search and rescue team from Sector Puget Sound, who conducted a thorough sweep of the lighthouse, the keeper's quarters, the surrounding coastline, and the waters within a 5-mile radius. They found no sign of Edward Crane. They found no evidence of violence, no blood, no indication of a struggle. They found the journal, which was collected as evidence, and the scratches on the doors, which were photographed and documented but never explained. They found the pool of water in the bedroom, which had evaporated by the time they arrived, leaving only a faint stain on the wooden floor that would remain visible for months afterward. They found nothing else. Edward Crane had simply ceased to exist, vanishing from the station between his final journal entry sometime during the night of November 14th and Samuel Torres's arrival on the afternoon of November 15th. The official report classified his disappearance as unknown, presumed accidental death related to storm conditions. No body was recovered. No funeral was held. His daughter in Spokane received a letter from the Coast Guard, expressing condolences and a box containing his personal effects, including a worn copy of Moby Dick that he had been reading for 4 years without ever finishing, and a photograph of her as a child that he had kept on his nightstand throughout his time at Morrow Head. Samuel Torres was offered the opportunity to complete his 3-month rotation at the station, an offer he declined with an emphasis that the Coast Guard interviewer noted as bordering on panic in a statement provided before his departure on November 16th. Torres described his experience at Morrow Head in terms that were carefully measured, acknowledging the strangeness of what he had encountered while stopping short of making claims he knew would not be believed. He said the station felt wrong. He said the air inside the keeper's quarters was heavy, thick, difficult to breathe, even though the ventilation systems were functioning normally. He said he heard sounds during the few hours he spent there, sounds that seemed to come from inside the walls, sounds that might have been settling wood or might have been something moving in spaces where nothing should move. He said he saw something in the window of the lantern room as the supply boat pulled away from the pier, a figure silhouetted against the rotating beam, a figure that raised one hand in a gesture that might have been a wave or might have been something else. He said he did not wave back. He said he remembered what the journal said about not acknowledging them. He said he was never going back to Morrow Head, not for any reason, not for any amount of money, not if it was the last lighthouse on Earth. The Journal of Edward Crane was retained by the Coast Guard for 3 months before being transferred to the Washington State Archives, where it was catalogued, digitized, and filed in a collection of maritime historical documents that receives few visitors and fewer requests for access. A researcher from the University of Washington encountered it in 2024 while working on a study of lighthouse folklore in the Pacific Northwest. Her analysis, published in an academic journal with limited circulation, noted the consistency of Crane's accounts over the 4-year period, the detailed meteorological observations that matched historical weather records, and the psychological trajectory of a man experiencing prolonged isolation under stressful conditions. She concluded that the journal represented a compelling case study in isolation-induced paranoia, and that the supernatural elements described by Crane were textbook manifestations of extreme loneliness and sensory deprivation. She did not address the scratches on the door. She did not address the pool of water in the bedroom. She did not address the fact that 3 keepers before Crane had also vanished from Morrow Head under similar circumstances, their journals also recovered, their bodies also never found. The lighthouse at Morrow Head continues to operate. Under fully automated systems, its beam rotating every 30 seconds through the long Pacific nights, the keeper's quarters remain standing but are no longer occupied. The Washington State Parks Department has proposed demolishing the structure, citing structural concerns and the liability of maintaining a building at such a remote location. But the proposal has been delayed repeatedly due to historical preservation objections and what one internal memo describes as community resistance from parties whose specific concerns have not been documented. Local fishermen avoid the waters near Morrow Head when they can, particularly during storms, and those who must pass by report seeing lights in the keeper's quarters that should not be there, movement in windows that should be dark, figures on the rocks below the lighthouse that wave at passing boats with gestures that are almost human, but not quite. Samuel Torres lives in Arizona now, as far from the ocean as he could reasonably get, while remaining in the continental United States. He does not discuss his time at Morrow Head, does not read about lighthouses, does not watch movies or television programs that feature coastal settings. He has told exactly 2 people about what he experienced on November 15th and 16th, 2023. His wife, who listened without comment and has never mentioned it since, and a therapist specializing in trauma who suggested that Torres's experience was a combination of jet lag, suggestion from the journal he had read, and the natural anxiety of encountering an unexplained situation. Torres accepted this explanation. He found it comforting. He chose to believe it, but he still hears knocking sometimes late at night when storms pass through the desert and the wind rattles the windows of his home in Tucson. He knows it's the wind. He knows there's nothing at the door. He knows that whatever happened at Morrow Head, whatever took Edward Crane, whatever has been taking keepers since the Lighthouse was built in 1891, it cannot have followed him here, cannot have tracked him across 1,000 miles of land to a place where the ocean is nothing but a memory and a fear. He knows this. He still does not open the door. He still does not answer when something that sounds like a voice calls his name from the other side. He still lies in bed and listens to the knocking, and sometimes, in the spaces between knocks, he hears something else, something that might be breathing, or might be the wind, or might be nothing at all. And sometimes, just before dawn, when the knocking finally stops and the silence returns, he swears he can hear something laughing, soft and patient and vast, laughing at the door that remains closed, laughing at the rules that were never meant to protect, laughing at the understanding that it can wait, that it has always been waiting, that someday, whether in this life or another, everyone opens the door. Supplemental material recovered from Coast Guard. Archives includes a partial list of keepers assigned to Morrow Head Light Station since its construction in 1891. Of the 43 individuals who served at the station prior to full automation in 1978, 7 disappeared under circumstances classified as unexplained or accidental death without recovery. Of the 12 individuals who served in the Historical Preservation Program between 1978 and 2023, 4 disappeared under similar circumstances. The names of the disappeared, in chronological order, are 1. Jeremiah Walsh, keeper 1893 to 1897, disappeared November 1897. 2. Thomas Brennan, keeper 1912-1915, disappeared October 1915. 3. Albert Morrison, keeper 1929 to 1931, disappeared November 1931. 4. Douglas Finch, keeper 1944 to 1951, disappeared December 1951. 5. Robert Callahan, keeper 1962-1967, disappeared November 1967. 6. William Perry, keeper 1971-1974, disappeared October 1974. 7. James Okonkwo, keeper 1975-1977, disappeared November 1977. 8. 1985-1988, caretaker, disappeared October 1988. 9. David Reinhold, caretaker, 1994-1997, disappeared November 1997. 10. Patricia Vasquez, caretaker 2003-2007, disappeared October 2007. 11. Robert Ashworth, caretaker 2015-2019, whereabouts unknown since February 2020. 12. Edward Crane, caretaker 2019-2023, disappeared November 2023. All disappearances occurred during or immediately following major storm events. All disappeared keepers left journals or personal documents that were recovered after their disappearance. All journals contain references to knocking, voices and figures observed on the rocks below the lighthouse. All journals terminate with entries written during storms, entries that describe sounds from inside the walls, presences that should not be there, and a final decision to open a door. The journals are housed together in a secure section of the Washington State Archives. Access requires written authorization from the state archivist. Authorization has been denied to all. Request since 2024. The reason for denial, stated in a form letter sent to all applicants, is the materials you have requested are currently under review for preservation concerns. Access will be restored when review is complete. The review has been ongoing for 18 months. No completion date has been announced. Final supplemental. Robert Ashworth, the keeper who briefed Edward Crane in March 2019 and provided the 3 rules, was contacted by investigators following Crane's disappearance. Ashworth, who had been living in Boise, Idaho since his departure from Morrow Head, initially agreed to an interview, but failed to appear at the scheduled time. A follow-up visit to his residence found the house empty, the front door standing open, and scratches on the interior walls that Boise police described as animal damage, possibly from a large dog, though no evidence of a dog was found on the premises. Ashworth's vehicle was still in the driveway. His wallet and phone were on the kitchen counter. A half-finished cup of coffee sat on the table, still warm. His journal, found in a desk drawer, contained a single entry dated the morning of his disappearance. They found me. I don't know how. I followed the rules. I didn't open the door, but they found me anyway. I can hear them now in the walls, the same sound from Morrow Head, the same knocking, the same breathing. I thought I escaped. I thought 4 years of following the rules had been enough. But I understand now. You can't escape. You can only delay. The rules don't protect you. The rules just buy time. And eventually the time runs out. Eventually they come for everyone who has heard the knocking, everyone who has felt them waiting, everyone who knows that they are real. I am going to open the door now, not because I want to, because I am tired of waiting, because the waiting is worse than whatever comes after, because I have spent 6 years listening to them knock, and I cannot listen anymore. Whoever reads this, do not go to Morrow Head. Do not take the position. Do not think that the rules will save you. They are patient. They have been patient since before the lighthouse was built. They will be patient long after it crumbles into the sea. And they never forget, they never stop, they just wait and wait and wait. The door is opening now, I didn't touch it. It's opening on its own. They're coming in, The entry ends mid-sentence. The pen was found on the floor 3 feet from the desk. Robert Ashworth has not been seen since. Document status: active investigation. Do not distribute. Coast Guard Sector, Puget Sound. Case file, 2023 Mach 1114. Subject: Crane, Edward, missing person. Connected cases: 11 prior disappearances. See Appendix A. Status: no leads. Investigation ongoing. Note: any personnel assigned to Morrow Head Light Station for maintenance or inspection purposes must complete Form CG 7734, Isolated Station, Psychological Screening, Waiver and CG 8891, Acknowledgement of Historical Incident Risk, prior to deployment. Personnel are advised to limit station visits to daylight hours and to avoid the premises during forecasted storm events. Under no circumstances should personnel enter the keeper's quarters after dark. Under no circumstances should personnel respond to knocking, voices, or other auditory phenomena. Under no circumstances should personnel open any exterior door of the keeper's quarters until sunrise has been visually confirmed. Failure to comply with these guidelines may result in disciplinary action, injury, or outcomes consistent with historical incident patterns. The Coast Guard accepts no liability for personnel who disregard these protocols. You have been warned. The lighthouse at Morrow Head stands 127 feet above the Pacific Ocean on a promontory that has claimed more than 60 ships since European settlers first arrived in the region. Its beam rotates every 30 seconds, visible for 23 nautical miles in clear weather. It has no keeper. It needs no keeper. The systems are automated. The light burns on its own. But sometimes, during storms, fishermen passing in the night report seeing a figure in the lantern room, a silhouette moving behind the glass, hands pressed against the window as if trying to get out, or trying to get someone's attention, or waving. The fishermen do not wave back. They know better. They've heard the stories. They know what happens to people who acknowledge the figures at Morrow Head. They turn their boats away and sail for safer waters, and behind them, the lighthouse beam continues to sweep across the dark Pacific, and somewhere in the keeper's quarters, in the space between the walls where the scratching never stops, something waits. It has been waiting for a very long time. It can wait a little longer. Someone will come eventually. Someone always comes. And when they do, when they read the journals and ignore the warnings, and decide that the rules are superstition and the stories are folklore and there's nothing to fear from knocking in a storm, it will be ready. It will knock, and someone will answer. They always do. Eventually. End of compiled document. Archival status restricted. Next review date redacted. Final note. The sound files recovered from Edward Crane's personal recorder, which he mentions attempting to use to document the knocking, were successfully restored by audio forensic specialists in January 2024. The files contain 147 hours of recordings made during storm events between 2019 and 2023. Analysis of these recordings is ongoing. Preliminary findings indicate the presence of vocalizations beneath the audible static, vocalizations that appear to be human speech played at extremely low frequency and reversed. When corrected and enhanced, the vocalizations form coherent sentences. The sentences are names. They are the names of every keeper who has ever served at Morrow Head Light Station, spoken in order of their service, repeated continuously throughout every recording. The final name spoken in every recording, regardless of date, is a name that does not appear in any historical record of the station. Audio specialists have declined to identify this name. When pressed, the lead specialist stated only, "It's not a name from the past. It's a name from the future. It's the name of whoever listens to these recordings all the way through. I stopped listening before I heard it. I suggest you do the same."